Okay, welcome to today's Inequality Institute seminar. I'm delighted to welcome back today Beatriz Jambrina Canseco from the University of Oxford. Although I know quite a few people in the room know Bea, but she was a master's student here, PhD, so a very successful PhD here in the Philippine Department. But also, you was affiliated to the Triple Centre.
I am a bit
Yeah, and now researcher to the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. So we're very pleased to have you back. We'll do about an hour. I think you have to take questions as it goes along.
Yes,
Yeah, we'll take questions as it goes along, and then I'll try and try and leave a bit of space for them at the end as well. Great. So thank you very much. Welcome back there. Presentation.
Hi everyone. Sorry that I'm still eating because hunger is a problem. So as Neil was saying, I am research officer at the University of Oxford, a visiting fellow here. And as people have noticed, I'm here to talk to you about local cost of living and the geography of inequality. A bit of context maybe on this project. This actually spun off of my PhD somewhat randomly, in the sense that I had done all of this to adjust wages for a paper of mine. And then it was pointed out to me that this was actually something that was, although descriptive, really useful, and that people didn't have it because the data didn't quite exist, and I had to combine data from quite a few sources. So this is kind of where this is coming from. That said, I will walk you. It might just have gotten the same. See to click. Is it connected? Sorry. Yeah, it should be. No, it's on. Like yeah, it's on. It's just not. There we go. Now it's just a bit slow. Okay. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so just an outline of how the talk is going to go. I'll run through a motivation of why we might want to adjust for local prices, which you might imagine is what I'm going to do. And then I'll tell you how I'm building these local consumer price indices. And then I'll walk you through basically what you can do with them. An example of what you can do with them, which is measuring income inequality. I'll tell you a bit of this, particularly in Spain. And then I'll run through some points on geography and poverty of, geography of both poverty and inequality in Spain, and then I'll conclude, right? Okay, so starting from the beginning, why local prices? Why might we want to adjust wages or incomes or whatever it is by local prices? And the justification is pretty obvious. Unless you've been living under a rock, you will know that there has been quite a lot of public policy discussion around the importance of rising cost of living. In the case of Spain particularly, housing is a really big deal. This is the case elsewhere, but particularly in Spain. And it's such a big deal that I've managed to find an article in the Express here in the UK telling me how this is a really big deal in Spain. And if you notice, it's talking about a housing crisis, and of course it's talking about specific places. The Canary Islands and Mallorca and Ibiza are the places that the Brits care about, but I can tell you that this is also a thing in Madrid and Barcelona, and in general, in the big cities much more than elsewhere. So a large part of the change in prices has to do with housing, and in particular in Spain, you get around about 30% of a family's budget that goes towards housing. What I mean by this, I'm going to be talking a lot about rentals. So in general, I'm talking about rentals and not about buying your own house, although in effect, there is an imputation of the cost that actual homeowners have for their housing, right? And this is not what I'm using. I'll explain later. And this is also a really big deal because there is a huge batch of new regulation that is coming in place across Europe. And in particular in Spain last month, there is new regulation that was announced. We don't really know how it's going to get implemented, but there is the very obvious implication that it's going to affect inequality, except we actually don't know that. And we're not going to know that because the way we measure inequality is usually like this. This is a random example. I'm just showing you the Gini coefficient from 1980 to 2023 of a series of countries. You see Spain in red, and you see stuff like this, right? This is Poland, for example, shooting up during the 90s. This line here is the UK that you see goes up all through the 80s and then flattens out. And in Spain, it looks, relatively stable across time. And the thing with this is that you're used to seeing graphs like this all the time, but the implication here is that within the same country, the prices are the same for everybody. So it doesn't matter if I live in Madrid or if I live in a village somewhere in the middle of nowhere. My inflation is going to be the same everywhere. And probably it isn't. I mean, it definitely isn't. I can tell you. So the idea here is that we would need local price indices that somehow adjust for this. This is basically the big contribution of the paper. So the paper in general is very descriptive. There is a working paper version floating around somewhere. So please, if you have suggestions, please let me know. But there's basically, what I've done is create a new public database of these local consumer price indices. And you get this for the 2006 till 2022. It might get updated, we'll see. And what I'm using is a mix of information on tax records, on rental listings, and on actual surveys to kind of cluster different prices and be able to build these indices. And they're gonna vary in general at the municipal level. There are caveats to this because the housing data is kind of sparse. So there are caveats and I'll explain later. But in general, think of variation of the municipal level. And this is really tiny. So in Spain, there's 8,131 municipalities. Very few missing observations. So think about 7,500 so municipalities. And the extra thing that I've done is that I've adjusted the expenditure patterns. I'll explain again in a second for different income groups. So I'm going to split the income distribution. Basically, the lowest quartile is low income, the top quartile is high income, and everyone else is middle income between, right? And the reason basically why this is new and novel and doesn't exist is because it really doesn't exist for the vast majority of countries. There has been very recent work going on in the US. So papers by Moretti and Rebecca Diamond that show how prices change a lot between different cities in the US. They have really nice credit card data that I don't have. But basically, other than in that setting, this really doesn't exist at such a disaggregated level. Some countries do run consumer price indices regionally, but this really misses out on the urban versus rural difference in prices, right? Which is kind of what we're interested in. And here you do see that overall in the whole period, you get urban areas that have more than 50,000 people in them getting around about 3% more inflation. So it's a significant difference. And what I'm going to do here is just use this to deflate specifically equivalized household incomes. You can do this with wages, as I was doing in my PhD. You can do it. You can apply it for multiple other things. But here, for the sake of illustration, I'm going to use equivalized household incomes. If anyone doesn't know equivalized, we're taking into account how many people live in a household. I'm assuming that. Yeah.
So your database contains local by income group or just local constructed using some information for the income groups?
I will go and explain this in a second. if you hold on, I think this is gonna be clear. Yeah. But yes, in general, yes, local by income group. So yeah. Okay, so this is in very simple terms how I'm building the index. What I'm trying to do is stay as close as possible to the official CPI methodology from the National Statistical Institute. So what you get is a local CPI that varies over area A and region R. I'm saying area A because the housing data is going to be relatively sparse. So what I do is that if I don't have data for you, because I'm using rental prices and maybe I don't have data on rentals in some village somewhere, what I do is cluster all those rural municipalities in whatever province in Spain, and assign that average price for everyone that is rural that I don't have data for. Then it's going to vary by K, meaning income group, and over time, evidently. And then this is quite simple. It's just a weighted sum, right? So I'm always going to compare prices for a series of goods. And this is a very basic basket of goods. I'll show you the goods later. So I don't have data for everything that you might spend your money on. And then again, this is going to vary over region and over time. And I'm going to compare each of those sets of prices to always Madrid in 2016. This is, of course, completely arbitrary. It's just for the sake of argument so that it's easier for you to understand. Everything is compared to Madrid in 2016. And this means that I'm going to be able to make comparisons both over time and in space. which is kind of what's nice about this. And then I'm gonna weight this sum by the actual share of total expenditure that people use in that basket, as is usual. And this is what's really gonna vary by case, so by income. So it's the shares, not the prices. Although bear in mind that there could be, technically you might expect to be substitution effects. So maybe poor households buying cheaper bread, for example, not taking this into account here. But in this case, I'm following Moretti's paper that does the exact same thing, actually. Okay, if this is clear, okay. So where am I getting the data from? I'm gonna have first non-housing prices. This comes from the so-called family budget survey. So this is the encuesta de presupuestos familiares, if you're familiar with it. And this is going to be representative at the regional level plus the provincial capitals. So you have some city variation in there. And I'm only going to have 100 different goods and services that follow these categories here. So you get food, different types of beverages, tobacco, cost of housing. I'll say more on that later. Water and the cost of picking up your trash in your house, electricity, gas, and other fuels, and the gas that you use in your car. And this is why I'm calling it a very basic basket, because if you notice, all those things kind of everyone needs, minus the car. And so what do I not get? There's no healthcare. Probably not a big deal in a setting like Spain where we have public healthcare. Would be a really big deal in the US, but here it isn't. Education, same thing. We have a public education system, probably not such a big deal, especially if you're low income. And here, the part that it's a pretty big assumption, I don't have data on stuff like clothing and stuff like leisure. So I don't know if you went to a hotel 170 times. I don't know if you went to a restaurant. And this is not because the data, so the survey does have information on the price that families paid for all of these things. I just don't have access to the quantity. So I don't know if they went to a hotel for 3 days or 7. So I just can't make that assumption. So what I assume is that basically everything else here is following the same trend as the basic basket. I don't think it's a crazy assumption. Okay, moving on to housing prices. In the housing prices, I'm taking advantage of the National Rental Price Reference System, that's called CPIs. This was something that the Spanish government released around about 2018 with data from 2015 with census tract data for how much basically rentals were going for everywhere. And this was released publicly because the government thought that it would reduce the information frictions that people usually get when they're trying to rent an apartment. So I'm basically taking all of this data, they're mixing tax records with the information from the loan registry, and kind of giving you prices by very specific location. This is going to vary by municipality. And this is where I'm doing this thing with clustering rural municipalities by province, if necessary. Now, the problem is that the data stops at 2015. So I needed to go backwards in time. So what I do is go to the webpage Idealista, that is the biggest kind of rental advertising platform in Spain. And they give me growth rates, both at the provincial level and for the provincial capital. I didn't write this. So what I'm going to assume is that the difference in levels comes from here. So a rural municipality will always be lower than, say, the city. But I'm assuming that the trend of a city that is not the regional capital is going to follow the same trend as the whole province. Bigger assumption, but nothing better because the data doesn't quite exist. So beyond this.
What fraction of people are owner occupiers?
Sorry?
What fraction of people in Spain are owner occupiers?
A lot.
And how?
Yes, this is fair enough. So so this is, maybe you can tell me what would convince you, because I've thought about this. There's round about 70-something% of families are owner occupiers. I would make the two arguments. One, when we're talking about young people in Spain, this is notoriously well known that they would like to buy a house or to rent out, but they don't have enough money. And this is a reason why I would push for rental prices, because I think it's a much more accurate depiction of what people, in general, the population would need to pay.
Unless they're with their parents.
Unless they're with their parents, which is what happens, but they might want to get out and they can't, and is my point. The second thing is I am trying to run robustness checks on this, but it's actually really tricky to get data on actual prices that the houses go for. And this is because the land registry has information on the space of the house, so how big the house is, whatever else, but their evaluation of the property is not the market price. So this is somewhat tricky.
Depending on interest rates should mean even housing costs for, if you've got a mortgage, then
Oh, you mean I can just impute for the
I don't know.
user
yeah.
of housing?
I'm just trying to think of.
No, fair enough, it could be. So this is actually useful, I'm running robustness checks, this is where I meant, like, if you have ideas, please
I
tell
was
me.
gonna say the same thing, that, owner occupiers, like probably half of those are mortgagers, so there's a cost of credit, which maybe varies by location. I mean, that's maybe not, depending on the banks, if they're kind of national or not. But yeah, so that's a big cost for people. It's not usually in the CPI basket.
No, it isn't. The official CPI basket, this is also why I don't use it. You get shares that go for housing that are very low, and it's because they don't take into account any of this. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they even put in like imputed rent for outright owners. So that's not really a cost that you face, but it is part of the CPI basket. So, yeah, I mean, rent is a sort of broad basket or coverage of all that maybe is sensible.
Fair enough. So
The EPF contain actual housing expenditure.
yeah, so
as a
the
mortgage payment.
EPF will tell you, they impute it. So they do the exact same thing. They ask how much do you spend on housing? And then they impute whoever is a homeowner to account for whatever cost. But I think this is reliable in terms of the share that goes into housing rather than the actual price, because again, I don't know what kind of house they have. Whereas the data from here from the CPI is actually very good, and I know exactly, like, I have information on the median rental price for per square meter. So it's a lot more reliable. This is the reason why I'm using it. But fair enough, because I do know that I need to run some robustness or some sensitivity to this. Fair enough.
So one question is.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you look at the idealista listings.
Yeah.
You have the price increase and proxy for price increases of new contracts. But you take into account the existing contracts.
Yeah.
In your sum.
No, yeah, so that's also a very fair point. There's no, yeah,
But the
it's by
EPF,
definition new contracts, so they could be going
so
further.
you apply the annual growth rate to all the share of rental agreements?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that whatever the growth rate, so for example, I have the data for 2015 where I know the actual price of the rentals, right, by municipality. What I'm taking from Idealista is it tells me from 2014 to 2015 in Madrid, prices went up by 3%. And I'm pulling those back. So everyone in
This information is about the new contracts.
Yeah.
So you are either overestimating or underestimating depending on.
Yeah, but fair enough. Do you have a solution?
No, because
Yes, that's accurate.
in all cases, when the CPI has the rental prices in the basket, they have a fraction of new contracts and the fraction of existing contracts. So they only apply the increase to the new contract.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
Well, you could just like, if you have Idealista for recent, like 2015-23, just to try to project forward and see how well they match.
I've done this. It's actually really not bad.
Okay.
No, yeah, I have done this. So would that convince you if I just show you more or less the trend?
Strengthen the assumption for sure.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, to me, it's natural using rental prices. And I think if you even look at Moretti's Diamonds paper, they argue that 70% of the variation of the local CPI is across space is like housing.
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah, it's huge.
important element of this.
Yeah, it's huge. Okay, yeah, that's fair. I have actually done that. I just need to create a graph. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And just social housing, does that?
So social housing, we used to have social housing, and then people bought the houses and then sold them off, and now the stock is really low. So one of the measures actually that the government is trying to push is building more social housing. I guess it's kind of like what happened here, that there used to be social housing, and then people sold them, and then it disappeared. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and the last thing, no more questions for me. Okay. The last thing is the expenditure shares that come from the same source as above, and you just get the different shares that you allocate to food, whatever else, right? And you get something like this. So here I'm just showing you kind of what you get by low income, middle income, and high income households, depending on the year. And what you see is that in this basket, so bear in mind, again, this will add up to 100. It's only for the basic basket. So you get around about 37% that goes towards housing. It's gone up a little bit over time. You get big consumption as well in food, as one would expect. Food prices gone down a little bit over time. Same thing for gas for your car. So pretty big cost that has gone down a little bit over time. And you see that there's, of course, different shares depending on high income, middle income. Changes are not huge, but they exist. Okay, so this is maybe what you wanted to see, which is why this is useful. And it's a question of, okay, where is it really expensive to live in Spain? And I'm going to be showing you consistently, because if you notice, it's a boom and bust period. So I'm showing you prior to the crisis, Spain is doing really well in 2006. Middle of the crisis, whole mess. 2016, recovery years, doing better. And 2022, post-COVID years, we're doing well again. And if you notice, so you see what you would expect, really high prices in the Balearic Islands, across Madrid and Barcelona. So Madrid, I have a clicker. So Madrid, Barcelona, Balearic Islands, and the Canaries, really expensive. Bits of the south, really expensive. And you see that with the crisis, what happens is that prices go down everywhere by quite a lot. Unsurprisingly, because what we had was a bubble that bust specifically for the construction sector. So it's not surprising at all. And this lower level of prices holds on in 2016. And finally, you see prices going up by quite a lot in 2022. And you see that, for example, so the broader urban area of Madrid and of Barcelona, and this is Zaragoza, become really expensive, as well as bits of the south, and of course the Balearic Islands and the Canaries, which is what that article.
What are the numbers?
Sorry?
Numbers, what are they?
Oh, sorry. So you get under 70%, so 30% cheaper than Madrid in 2016, give or take, between 07 and 75, 75, 85, and then 85, 95. And basically, think of red areas like more or less like Madrid in 2016, roundabout.
What's between Santander and Gijón?
Yeah, it was really expensive in 2006. I'm not that surprised. The Basque Country actually, so I should say the Basque Country here in Navarre are missing, and this is because there's no rental information for them. But I will bet you that they would be really expensive if they were there, but I don't have data for them.
So we basically see a deflation in.
Yeah, you see huge deflation in housing, and this is mostly driven by housing. So by and large, it's housing. So prices really collapse during the crisis. And here, if you know Spain, so just giving you the 20 most expensive municipalities for middle income households, you'd get Sitges. If you know Spain, you will know this is a coastal town right south of Barcelona, tons of mansions, zero surprises that this is the most expensive place. You see basically places in the Barcelona urban area and in the Madrid urban area, and you're gonna see as well a bit lower down the Balearic Islands. This is Ibiza, written in Catalan. And it used to be the most expensive place in Spain back in 2000. So roundabout prices that are give or take 25% more expensive than Madrid 10 years later. So steep, steep prices. And you see in general that the numbers, so the rank is not changing a lot. So I'm giving you the top 10, but the top places are pretty stable, as one would expect. This doesn't happen when I look at the bottom end. So these are municipalities that, to be honest, I know Alhama de Granada, but that's about it. They're very random places around the south and the west of the country, except for the way a bit further north. And you see that in general, these have changed a lot in ranking. So this tells you that the bottom of the rank, there's a lot more variation because more or less they have the same prices. And this just happened to be at the bottom end. But we're talking, yeah, like say 25% cheaper now than Madrid was in 2016. So quite a bit cheaper. So you're doing well. Now, one question that you might ask is, okay, how has this evolved over time, right? And so what I'm going to do is do a version of an elephant graph or a growth incidence curve, or however you know this graph, a Lechner-Milanovic graph, I don't know. So I'm going to be calculating, dividing the local CPI into percentiles. Right? And then I'm going to calculate the annual growth rate of that CPI, of that particular percentile, over time. And I'm going to split it crisis, kind of post-crisis. And what you see is during the crisis, what I was saying, prices drop by a lot, they drop most in the most expensive places. Again, because it's driven by housing, so you would expect this. However, recent price hikes, and this is particularly the case, I can tell you can't see it in the graph, in the post-COVID era, a lot more evenly spread geographically, because fuel costs and foodstuffs have gone up in price by quite a bit. So that's driving a lot of the variation, and this is why it's far more even. You will notice that here at the top percentile, and that is the locations that I've shown you earlier, they're still getting really big price hikes. So you're still getting 3% a year. So it's pretty high. Okay. The other question that I might ask is, okay, who is this benefiting in the income distribution? And when I do this, I split now the household income in 2006, so at the beginning of the period in percentiles, and I calculate how much inflation they've been experiencing in each location. And what you see is basically that it's regressive. So you are getting the bottom quintile with worse inflation than the top quintile. Not fantastic for whoever is in that particular situation. It amounts to around about 3% more at the bottom than at the top.
So why is this so much?
Oh, this is because I've been creating it by percentile, and I should have. I mean, if I do this more granularly, you will get a smoother graph, if you want. But it's just a feature of the fact that I've been calculating it exactly by the percentile. Yeah.
Do you look at the relationship between housing prices and non-housing prices?
Ooh, no, I haven't.
Interesting to motivate. Okay, maybe a lot of people are using housing prices as a proxy for local CPIs, and to kind of say to what extent the food prices follow the rental.
Yeah, so this is what I was telling you here, that I do know because I checked that this part is actually driven by fuel and by food. So the fact that it's much more evenly distributed. Yeah, but that's a fair, I can actually easily get a graph on this. Okay, so the question is kind of what we've been talking about. This really looks like it might affect inequality when we take this into account. And here I'm just showing you, because I'm indexing everything to 2006, 2016. What I'm showing you here is a static picture, basically where you would be comparing just locations. So I'm holding time constant. Remember that we were comparing everything to Madrid in 2016. So what this is telling you is how people are doing simply based on the fact that they live either in Madrid or in a more expensive place or in a cheaper place, right? And so what you get is when you adjust, this is the national income using the national CPI, what I get once I add the local CPI adjustment, I get a distribution that shifts to the right. And this is because people who live in cheaper places are now better off. And I also get a wider distribution and particularly a much bigger tail. And this kind of looks like it would affect inequality, particularly between here at the very top and there at the very bottom, right? And this might actually be the case.
Can you show that and I'll sort of give you a much more fine detail?
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Logs. Yes, I can do that. Okay. Now the thing is, this is what happens when I look at the growth in income inequality, which is what we care about. What I'm doing is giving you the 90-10 ratio. So people at the top and people at the bottom of the distribution in a ratio, and indexing them both to the year 2006 because I want them to be on the same scale. And showing the distribution over time. The first thing that you see is that there is an actual statistical difference between local CPI adjusted and national CPI adjusted. And this is one of the reasons why I'm arguing that really we should be doing this, because it's not the same living in a very expensive place as not. That said, you see that this actually, the difference only exists basically during the crisis and the recovery years and then tapers off. You see the same thing. So this is the 50-10 ratio, same thing, and the 90-50 ratio. And you see, so what I'm seeing in general as a trend, as one would expect, inequality goes down, then the crisis hits, inequality goes up, and slowly tapers off. You see the COVID crisis, and then for it coming down again.
So,
yeah.
But your title says growth in income inequality.
Yeah.
Is it really growth?
Well, it's changes in income. Yeah, okay. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Precision helps.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Here you see that actually people during the crisis did really badly at the bottom. So it was really the bottom of the distribution losing out relative to the median rather than anything else. And this actually, by and large, if you look at it this way, it hasn't really recovered even now. So people at the bottom seem to be really not doing well. It's not as much the case of the 90th percentile to the 50th, right? There's still a difference, but not as much. So it really looks like it's something that has to do with the extremes of the distribution. And this is what is curious, that you don't really see it. I mean, so the numbers are consistently higher with the local CPI adjusted, but it's not statistically significant with the Gini or the Thiel index. I'm not that surprised by this because we do know that the Gini index is for normal usual distributions is going to be more attuned to changes around the center of the distribution, and the Thiel pushes more towards the bottom. So if you think
True.
not true?
No.
Oh, nor it to be, okay. Violence and push more towards the bottom.
No. You think if the MLD, mean logarithmic deviation, the tile is a bit more above that.
See, okay.
Yes. Okay. Sure.
No, fair enough. Okay.
Your points to expect, it's the extremes.
Yeah, it's the extremes of the distribution, yes. So the thing here is you're assuming, using different measures by definition, you're assuming different welfare functions. If your argument is, which is what I think the argument is for most people, that inequality has to do with the extremes, so people at the very top and people at the very bottom, then we care about this and that one there over there. Interestingly also, it's not going to show up at a huge difference when we look at relative poverty. Relative poverty, I'm saying here, percentage of households below 60% of the median of the income, right? Yeah.
One question. So first you kind of were showing that there was basically a deflation between 2007 and 2016.
Yep.
And then you kind of, and in this period, you actually underestimate inequality if you ignore this local cost of living. I'm just trying to kind of, because I mean, like what we know in general is like, if anything, inflation, so not deflation. Inflation hits more the poor people. So I would assume that deflation would be relatively more beneficial for poor people compared to rich people.
Yeah, but what is deflating is the houses. Like it's not really the rest of the prices. I'm thinking now that I should really give you like a graph disaggregating by category.
Yeah.
No, I'm realizing now that this is a really good idea. So bear in mind that this is constantly affecting more housing prices, and I would assume that the richer people are going to spend more money on housing.
What it said on the original slide, you had shares way back.
Yeah, they do spend more. It's
but-
40% more or less. It's not huge, but it's consistently higher.
It's not much different.
Connected to this question, as I understand you, as you said, you are considering that you apply the housing price changes to all this, to the whole universe, not only to the fraction of contracts which correspond to the new contracts of every year. This may be an overestimation of inflation when inflation is going up, and an underestimation of inflation when inflation is going down, unless the deflation is happening at the top of the distribution of rents. So that may have happened in Spain. So that's why we cannot guess about the final effect. Yeah.
Trying to know that this is actually true.
That's my guess.
No, yeah, but no, I'm trying to think if there is any way that I can actually figure this out. I don't know. Yeah.
But if you're talking about housing prices as a deflator, you also have to think that Madrid is a more inelastic place, so the fluctuation of prices are going to be more cyclical as opposed to the other places. So I guess you're in the right direction, that it's not amplifying effects. It's just that you're just measuring housing according to houses. And the fluctuation is going to happen more in Madrid than in the other places.
Elsewhere. I mean, yes, like it's going to happen. It happens more in the most expensive places. Because remember that I showed you that graph initially, that the fall is higher in most expensive places.
And those are the inelastic markets, so they fluctuate more.
The thing is that it's really hard to know, and it's going to be hard to show this.
There are proxies I can show you.
Please, if anyone can help, send me an email. Okay. This is what I wanted to show you is particularly what happens with the whole of the distribution particularly during the crisis, which is the period that we're talking about. And actually the picture looks a lot nicer when you look at local CPIs than when you look at national CPIs. So this is one of these global incidence curve graphs with income. And if you notice here, the picture looks really bleak. So if I use the national CPI, it really looks like the whole distribution is losing out and everyone is doing really badly. The thing is that this is not taking into account differential prices in space. Once I do that, so once I take into account the fact that not everyone lives in Madrid, basically, what I'm seeing is that most of this line is actually people are in fact experiencing real growth in income. It's just the really bottom that is really not having a good time. And this is the one period where you see very stark differences. So if you look at the other periods, they look relatively similar. There are differences, but they're not huge. But during the downturns, it's really changing how you perceive inequality. And if you see the distance, it's really hard to see here, but the distance between this and this is smaller than the distance between this and this. It's really hard to see in the graph, but it's basically what you're capturing in the other graph when I'm calculating growth rates. Okay. Now what can I tell you about the geography of poverty and inequality in general in Spain? There is one debate that Neil will be very familiar with, that is the general discussion that we know that there are really big differences in income, and in everything between Spanish regions, which is true. There's a big difference in levels. However, the question is, the Thiel index has this very nice property that you can actually decompose inequality that is because regions are different, so between regions and within them. And what we see actually here, which is what I want you to look at, is that consistently the inequality between regions is not what is driving the differences in inequality in Spain. The difference is coming from the within component. So within each region, there is quite a bit of inequality within each one of them. So you will get, very sharp differences in Andalusia, for example, and elsewhere. And so what I try to do then is look at within region inequality exclusively and say, okay, let's say that I only take people in Andalusia and I tell you something about, this is Andalusia here. So I tell you something about inequality within Andalusia, and I'm using again the 9-to-10 ratio here. And what you see is you're gonna get, basically red is bad, blue is a bit better. What you see is that inequality is actually relatively low to begin with. It's always been higher in the Canaries here and in Andalusia. It gets much worse during the crisis, and in particular hits the south and the east of Spain. And then it does go back sort of to normal, which you would expect. The second thing that I want you to look at is the fact that cities consistently here are going to be more unequal than the rest of the region. So if I only take the city into account, there's more inequality there than elsewhere. I would have expected that. That's fair enough. And the third thing that you can't see here, because I forgot to put it in, is that you also underestimate this if you use the national CPI. So this is going to look a lot like it's a lot less unequal if I use the national CPI rather than this. The story with poverty, which also matters and has been a huge debate in Spain recently, is different. There is a very, very clear north-south divide, so that existed kind of already to begin with, but it got really, really bad during the crisis. So here we're talking about 20 to 30% of households. Sorry, yeah.
So are you using local median income to calculate?
No, here I'm using, so you're always comparing to 60% of the median income in the country, which is the measure that the government would use for this. So what you're saying here is that in Andalusia, you get something between 20 and 30% of households that are going to be poor, basically, by that standard. And you see that it's particularly bad again in the south. It's gotten worse during the crisis, and it's still bad. And this is a division that has split the country since the crisis, and we still have not recovered. So you're still seeing really sharp divergences in poverty between the north and the south. And this wasn't as much the case. You see the opposite here, right? That urban areas actually have a few less poor. If I look at if I use the national CPI, this is going to look worse. So it's the opposite direction. So the national CPI is consistently overestimating poverty in rural areas and underestimating it in cities. And I really should have shown you that map, but I haven't added it. I'm sorry. There's another map exactly like this that kind of shows you this, that basically there's an overestimation in rural areas, underestimation in cities. And this is a problem for public policy, obviously. Okay.
Can I ask another geeky question? So in the sort of in our world, sort of classic work on sort of spatial inequality, you tend to say that this is due to the distribution of rich people rather than being the distribution of people on below median incomes. That's the same in.
I haven't looked at rich people. I could.
I mean, like, so essentially.
So I'm only looking at at poor people here, but I could look at rich people. If you're talking about the 1%ers, I wouldn't trust the survey data with this, because what I have is survey data. And honestly, these people are not there, or they lie, whichever one. But it could. Yeah.
So you said that between inequality doesn't matter, but actually, I mean, if you go back to these numbers, the composition.
Yes.
There's kind of like a.
I mean, there is a between component around 4%. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. I'm
Relatively, it changes more than the within component, no?
You mean the change?
Yeah, when you think about like what drives the change in tail. Like if you look at 2016, 2022,
okay.
Actually.
I mean, I was just thinking of the debate that keeps telling me, oh, you know, the big problem is the differences between regions. And it's like, I mean, yes, sort of, but in the case of inequality, not really.
I mean, you know, I don't think it's a fair statement because I mean, of course, within our component always will be bigger than between, because you're effectively comparing a very poor person in Madrid to a very rich person in Madrid versus like the average person in Barcelona.
Everywhere.
So and you know, doesn't mean that geography doesn't matter in other ways. Like geography could affect within component as well. So I think, you know, I'm not saying we should conclude, but I think it actually in this case I would say it's quite interesting that it looks like between component is driving the change in tail between 16 and 22, for instance. So maybe I would not.
That you and I read this completely.
I mean, I'm just like I wouldn't discount completely this part.
Yeah, how does this compare to our data?
It's quite similar. I mean, so we're running this kind of similar R-squares between different countries, UK, France, Germany, Canada, US, and it's kind of similar level. It's like 3-7%. And again, we don't think it's a full story because I mean you're kind of ignoring the geographic difference within component, which could be quite pronounced. Actually, when we're trying to kind of include this into the picture, this kind of geographic aspect of inequality goes even to 50%. So it's a bit shaky estimation, but I mean, what I think is interesting in your case is that actually this seems to matter. I mean, in terms of changes, right?
It's small, yes. Okay.
So you can because
I'm good.
the tail is, if you go back to the tail is falling a lot between 16 and.
Yeah, so you can see it in the graph actually. So it really looks like, first of all, like if you see both the Gini and the tail index, they look like inequality barely went up during the crisis, if you notice. And it's telling you that then, since then, they have really gone down. And you don't see this when you look at the extremes. You're looking really at a very different picture. But yes, that looks like it just collapses. Yeah.
Want a general question, or you can conclude.
I was gonna conclude. I was okay. Yeah. Okay. So just to remind you everything that I've been telling you, that you will hopefully remember at least this. This is basically what I've been telling you is you get standard measures of inequality and poverty that completely ignore cost of living. The question here in this paper is, okay, how much do these measures change if we actually measure this a bit better? I'm not saying properly, but like quite a bit better than what we had before. And the big contributions of the paper are the database, that is, by the way, available if you need it. It's on the Harvard Dataverse, that calculates local CPIs for Spain. We have variation both over time and in space and by income group. This is going to be useful. And how this kind of changes our perception of inequality and poverty. And the two big deals is that you are understating how inequality changes over time. So in particular, during the crisis, you see that inequality in fact increased more than we would think using the national CPI. And you get with poverty rates that you're overinflating rural poverty and you're underestimating urban poverty. And both of these things have pretty big public policy implications. I ran through a bit of a discussion of what happens if you adjust, for example, how you give aid across different regions, this is a big deal in Spain. Issues with minimum wages, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously this has implications for a lot of things. Bear in mind, if anyone is working on Spain, you can very easily use this as I did initially for my PhD to adjust wages. So there's multiple applications of this. And that's it. Thank you.
Then 10-15 minutes for questions, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's great to see people putting investments in infrastructure. Great, contributing, really good. Suggesting for perhaps a spin-off paper from this, motivated by the way in which poverty and inequality are also measured in the UK. There's a parallel universe of both sort of standard, let's call them disposable income measures, but there's also a distinction between housing before the deduction of housing costs, income before the deduction of housing costs and after the deduction of housing costs. And that came about in the UK, particularly for exactly the same motivations, namely differences in housing costs and of course how they change over time. So for spin-off, what you could do is maybe use the EPF measures of spending on housing costs. So you will have those for both homeowners and for renters, and create an after housing cost measure. And compare the standard Eurostat type stuff, SILT type stuff, which is a before housing cost measure and the after housing cost measure, and see if the story tallies with what you've got here. I suspect it will, because everything's driven by housing costs, as you say.
Yes.
Mostly.
It's a massive,
Mostly.
yeah, it's what really shifts everything around. Okay, thank you. Bring it in mind.
You talked a bit about the sort of Moretti paper, which is similar things for the US, which got me sort of thinking about the cross-national differences there. Do you have a feeling for how different this is to other countries?
So it's really hard to know because really the data doesn't exist. It's really different from the US, but well, you get similar patterns. So Moretti is gonna tell you basically the same thing. There have been really big shifts, but you don't get this really hard hit during the crisis, for example, that in Spain really hits housing. And in other places, I would assume this is not the case. So I don't know what you would get with that. So I don't know. The Moretti paper is actually not looking at inequality at all. So he just computes basically a version of these local CPIs, but he has much nicer credit card data. So he doesn't need to kind of like go through different sources and cluster them together. It's a lot more specific. So they're kind of different papers in that way. He doesn't look at inequality. That might be a paper idea for anyone who has that data, yes.
Yeah, but credit cards exclude the lowest earners, or can do. If you're looking at credit card data.
In the US, I don't know, it's quite easy to get a credit card and to get into credit card debt actually in the US.
I know.
So I don't know.
So.
Straight up, but yeah, you can say this tomorrow too. Not my paper, but it's a very good paper.
Just a question on inflation. So it peaked in 2022. I wonder how spread geographically it was. Was that more concentrated in certain?
It was very evenly spread. So you actually get in the latest run. So here I'm just showing you, here's where you see that it's quite evenly spread. If you look at the 2020-2022 period, sorry, too many 20s, you actually see that it's more rural areas that get hit hardest by this fuel
Stuff, yeah.
Fuel and food that have gone up by a lot.
Right.
And I was actually very surprised by this because initially I ran the calculations and I saw like really high inflation for the latest years for rural areas and I thought I had done something wrong. And then I checked other sources.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, it's not me, it's a national thing.
Also, Xavier Yaravella was here. Also, he looks at inflation inequality, he shows in the recent inflation surge, it's actually middle income households which are
that get hit the hardest.
Because of this fuel cost and related so it used to be just lower income households, but it's sort of changed. So I wonder,
but it's kind of
I guess you see similar.
I could span on this. I haven't really, so of course I could create all these maps that I've been showing you are for middle income households. I mean, Actually, I haven't done that, actually. I haven't done this for low income and high income. Maybe I should.
You got
Yes,
max
it's really easy.
inflation rates.
Yeah. Okay,
Credit funds.
yeah, this is, I can plug it in the appendix. That's actually, I can't believe I hadn't done that. Thank you, Joel. That's really easy. Yeah, it's done. I mean, it's there.
Fundamental part of your paper.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
You have the rental prices.
yes.
I guess maybe conceptually it would be better if you actually try to impute the rents of homeowners and add them to their income. Because I think that would, because then since you're adding the housing cost into your CPI.
This is what Stephen was saying, but you want me to use user costs. So to assume that it's going up by whatever the.
No, I mean, you probably know from the data if someone has a house or not.
For the EPF, yes,
So
yeah.
then you could just artificially increase their income because they don't have to pay the rental.
They might have to pay a mortgage.
In quite a lot of your period, people presumably have depreciating housing assets as well.
Well, yes, yeah, so I mean, basically, this is when the bubble hit. Actually, a lot of people had trouble paying the mortgages, and of course, the actual value of the house went down, even if you had wanted to sell it, because no one was buying houses.
I guess
It's
quite in
tricky.
general, it'd be nice to somehow include this housing better into the definition of income, maybe.
You agree with reviewer number 2. Whoever that is. The problem is that it's not that easy to do this, so. Okay, I agree, but.
We'll fight back. I mean, the housing stock are likely to be very different between the renters and the owners, I bet.
You mean, okay,
In Spain, so
inequality, you mean?
yeah, probably location, so that it's actually very hard to produce any sort of reliable hedonic price things that you can just do
Yeah, to
translate from one to the other.
yeah, to adapt it, yeah, but I mean. It really, if anyone can think of like a good robustness check, because everyone keeps asking me about housing prices, and I'm like, I know, but also this is really not that easy to do because I don't have this information. So, yeah.
Can you go back to the growth plots? Inequality, this one, the last one, and the following one. No, just because inequality papers usually don't show confidence intervals, and here you have shown confidence intervals. And for instance, in these two cases, there are no differences.
There are no differences. You only see them in the extremes. Yeah.
In the extremes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is what I was saying, that it's with the genie and the title, you don't really see an actual difference. I mean, they're nominally, so technically they are higher. Yeah, but usually I'm trying not to cheat here. This is why I put the confidence intervals in.
Final question?
Yeah, you can stop it.
Well done, thank you very much.